Hey everybody, today we're debating the non-sequitur show controversy, and we are starting right now.
We're in the end game now.
Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here as today we are discussing a very important topic, namely whether or not Steve was justifiably, you could say, dusted from the Non Sequitur show. By the way, I want to say thanks so much to Steve, who has been extremely supportive of this channel. And I have to be fair as well. We want to be completely fair and completely unbiased during this debate, which is admittedly heated, is that I have to say thanks to Kyle as well. Both the Non Sequitur show and the Great Debate community and Steve's personal channel have been extremely kind to us at Modern Day Debate. Like, we've grown significantly because of them, and so I have to thank both Steve and Kyle. And a special thanks tonight, Steve. He reached out a while back and he said, "Hey, like, can I promote you? I'd be happy to promote you." And I was like, "Well, that's really nice of you, you know." So we have been trying to promote the sorry, didn't sleep last night. I'm a little bit slow, but the Great Debate community. Thanks so much. So, with that, I want to mention that the Great Debate community is linked down in the description, and our guests are linked down in the description. We are excited to have them here. I have to say thank you guys so much, both Red and Tom, for giving us your time, just being willing to have this conversation here to share your perspectives. So I'm just going to quick remind everybody that your links are in the description, and then everybody that you're here, I just want to give each of the speakers a chance to share what they've been up to at their channel. So maybe just in one or two sentences, describe what they've been up to, and that way the audience has just a rough idea. And then if you enjoy what you're hearing throughout the entire discussion, you can say, "Oh, sweet, I'll just check out their links in the description," so you can conveniently subscribe to their channel. So Red, if you want to share, we would love to hear what you are up to at your channel in a couple of sentences. And thanks again for being here. This is the first time here. We're thrilled to have you.
Oh, thank you very much. My channel is Red's Rhetoric. There I debate flat earthers, and upcoming I will be live streaming the Falcon Heavy launch that is currently scheduled for the 24th going into the 25th. That should be great. I'll be having Bull also producing that one, so look forward to that. If you do head over to my channel and watch the flat earther debates, please grab some face palm protection and your nearest waterproof receptacle. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you very much, Red. And Tom, excited to have you here as well. Thanks for being here. If you want to share what you've been up to at your channel.
Yeah, sure. I'm an atheist debater. I usually debate the position that there is no reason to believe in the existence of God. I usually have on professors and philosophers, biologists, cosmologists, astrophysicists, and those kinds of things to debate the position.
You bet. Well, thanks for being here, both of you. We want to move quickly so we can have as much conversation as possible. This one's going to be short and sweet tonight, so I want to quick go through a couple of house cleaning things, and then we will let the speakers engage. And so, one, want to say we are giving 100% of super chats that come in during this live stream to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, which is linked down in the description. That's the organization that has the pink ribbon emblem. And so we just want to let you know that even if you're not able to give, if you're like, man, times are tight, you are supporting our charity drives that we are doing just by being here. Like, it supports the channel just by watching, just by giving us like likes. That actually does help us just kind of grow on YouTube to have a greater influence. And so we just want to say thanks for being here. Also, as mentioned, the Great Debate community of Steve McRae is linked in the description. They have been just extremely kind to us. I've honestly been, I told Steve right before we went on, I said, I gotta be honest, like, I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed. Thank you so much for sending everybody over here. And so if you haven't seen the Great Debate community, I've got their logo up right now. And so we would highly encourage you to check them out. Whew. Next up, we want to mention, we did talk about we are going to do a charity stream as well, where if you're saying, hey, what? I thought we were going to do a stream where we give 100% of the proceeds to the Diabetes Research Foundation. We are doing it. I promise. We're doing it tomorrow. It just so happened we moved this one in between. So, want to also mention, it's true that we have not yet gotten YouTube to not take their 30% off of Super Chats, as they always do, but don't worry. it's still 100% of your super chat will go to that donation or that foundation, because the channel Modern Day Debate, we are going to match that 30%. So theoretically, if $100 comes in, YouTube takes 30, and we will put 30 back in so that a full $100 is given to the research foundation. So thanks for your patience with explaining that. If you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the live chat. If you put an @Modern Day Debate at the start, it makes it a little bit easier for me to see. And if this is your first time here, we'd encourage you to hit that subscribe button. We are trying to build an eclectic community filled with people from different walks of life, and we want to be fair as possible to every one of them. And frankly, I have a vision for this channel, which is just the result of everybody's help. And I'm just very excited about what we have in store in the future. And so thanks for being here. I'm very excited to let the speakers engage now. So thanks for your patience. And with that, gentlemen, I wanted to let everybody know, because people are like, whoa, he's taking that side? Well, there's a lot of nuance, so I want to give the speakers plenty of time to explain their position. So given that, I think pretty much everybody is already thinking under the impression that Red would be arguing, well, I'll let them both explain it. So TJump, we will let you start. And thanks for being here. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure. So my position is that what initially got this controversy started was that Kyle wanted to go in a new direction with the channel and do some things that were not up Steve's alley. And he had gotten a lot of complaints about Steve that certain people were not comfortable being on the show with Steve, and he wanted to create a safe space, essentially, for people who weren't Steve friendly. And so he was going to take this new direction and create this new kinds of shows that were just managed by him and his other new co-hosts that were un-Steve related. And Steve felt pushed out by this, and was, because it's his channel along with Kyle's, he was kind of expecting to be paid 50-50 for all the shows that were on the channel. And Kyle kind of thought that was unfair, because he's now making this entirely new genre on the channel, which is all done by him with no input, no help from Steve on doing those. And so paying Steve 50% of the work that is all being done by Kyle on these new segments is not necessarily a reasonable expectation on Steve's part. And so Kyle essentially just cut him out and said, no, we're not going to pay you anything for those, which was pretty much an unreasonable thing on Kyle's part to do. But at this point, everything is not too unreasonable. So Kyle, if he wanted to make a new segment of the show, which is just him doing all of the work with his new co-hosts, that's totally fine. And if he didn't want to pay Steve for that, it's kind of reasonable to not pay Steve 50-50 for these new episodes that Steve is not doing any of the work on. So not paying Steve for those is also kind of reasonable, but cutting him out completely is kind of unreasonable. But then then Steve, Boole, and Red kind of cornered Kyle into a conversation that Kyle wasn't prepared to have when he was really stressed out. And it upset him, pissed him off a lot, and he just cut out Boole and Steve completely. And that was done out of like a fit of anger, and Steve wasn't willing to compromise at all, and he said, we wanted the 50-50 no matter what. And out of anger, Kyle just cut everybody out. And that was not the most reasonable thing to do, but given the fact that he was so stressed at the time, I can see why he may have done that out of anger. But his previous actions, him wanting to make a new segment of the show, that's totally fine. He should have the right to do that. And him wanting to not have to pay Steve 50% of all the work he's doing, that's also pretty reasonable. But what should have happened was Steve should have offered to make a new segment that's just Steve without Kyle, to make up for the lost revenue, and so that they could still balance it out 50-50. And I think that would have been the most amicable solution to this whole debacle. That's my position.
Thanks, Tom. Go ahead, Red. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Yep. My position is that pretty much everything that Kyle did was not the most ethical thing. When Kyle and Steve both made this channel, there was a mutual understanding when they made that channel. And it was indeed Kyle's idea to come up with a type of talk show where they would have debates, have discussions, and stuff like that. And he went to Steve to make that dream a reality. Now, as the channel got more and more popular, they started to get really comfortable with the way things were, where they could branch out into other segments. And that's something that Kyle took the lead on. However, somewhere along the lines, Kyle got it in his head that the Non-Sequitur show wasn't him and Steve. The Non-Sequitur show was just him. And he would be the one to decide in which direction the show would go. He would be the one to decide who would get scheduled, when, for how long, whatever. Essentially, if it were to be the case that Steve would have agreed to Kyle's demands, Kyle would effectively be in charge of his paycheck and treat him as an employee rather than as an actual partner. And that's not something that Steve would agree to, especially when you look at all the facts of the matter. So when you see just how hard Steve was fighting for this, Steve was kind of blindsided by this at the end of it. And even though at the time that this call was leaked, well, not really leaked, but whatever the case may be, that was a conversation that took a very long time to happen. And essentially, it was either now or never type of deal. We have been trying, or Steve and Boole have been trying to get in contact with Kyle for weeks, if not months. And always the conversation would get pushed to tomorrow or next week, and then tomorrow or next week would never come. So it had to happen at some point. I have my own theories on that. We can discuss those if we want, but that is essentially my position, that Kyle got it in his head that he was Non-Sequitur, that Non-Sequitur was not a partnership, and that was completely wrong, in my opinion.
All right, we can start with that. So I think that he thought that a lot of the work he was doing on the technical side, the sound and the graphics and stuff, was mostly him. But I don't think he was trying to subvert Steve and say he was just taking over the channel. I think he was only doing that for this new segment that was just him, that he was not including Steve in. I don't think he was trying to completely take over the entire channel. It was just this new segment.
And the new segment would involve only scheduling him 2 times a week. That's quite a lot of new segments, in my opinion.
Pretty sure I think he said 4 times a week.
Well, that was something that Steve was requesting. Steve was requesting to be on the show more. And Steve was also requesting to, if Kyle needed a break, to have him just take complete control of the show for a certain period of time so that Kyle could have a break. The fact that Steve did not have, I guess, the right to make those decisions as being a 50% partner kind of struck a nerve with Steve, and I can honestly see why.
I can agree, but I don't think that was the intent. I mean, I think if Steve offered to make another new segment, if there's just Steve's new segment, just like Kyle was making his new segment, I think Kyle would have been totally okay with that. I think there would have been no issues there at all. I think the problem is that Steve was asking for 50-50 on work that Kyle was doing on his own, and I think that's harsh. That's a really harsh thing to ask. Like, if we made a channel together and I made a new segment of the channel that's just all me, and you have played no part in it, and I'm doing all of the work for it, and you want 50% of the money for that, I mean, I would not want to give you 50% of the money when I'm doing all of the work on this new segment. I'd still give you 50-50 on all the stuff that we work cooperatively on, but on my segment, I wouldn't do that. I mean, doesn't that seem reasonable to you?
No, it doesn't, and I'll tell you why. Because at the very beginning, it was agreed that that Kyle would have creative freedom on the channel. That much is true, and Kyle wanted it to be that way. But having creative freedom for the channel doesn't necessarily make it your channel and only your channel to decide how long Steve actually gets on. Hell, having any kind of freedom doesn't make it your channel and only your channel. If I hand you keys to the Lamborghini, that doesn't make it your Lamborghini. And I'm sure every valet driver in the world would want that to not be the case. Well, it sucks to be them. The fact remains is that just because Kyle was given creative freedoms, and just because Kyle used those creative freedoms, that doesn't automatically make it his show, where he can dictate what happens, when it happens, and how many times Steve McRae actually pops on. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Right, I agree. Well, that's why I'm saying that Steve should have offered to be able to make his own new segment that was just Steve without Kyle. And I'm sure Kyle would have agreed to that. I don't think Kyle would have any issues there. So the problem wasn't, he wasn't trying to limit Steve being on the show. He was just creating his own new segment. And Steve could have done the same. I don't think there's anything that Kyle would have objected to there. I mean, so the dichotomy you're trying to face is that either Kyle creates his new segment and cuts Steve out, or Steve should have creative freedom to come on whenever he wants. But really, there's a third option here, which is Steve could create his own new segment also alongside Kyle. And so Kyle has his own personal segment, Steve has his own personal segment, and they have the cooperative thing they normally do. And that would still measure out to about a 50-50 split. So the problem here was that Steve took it personally that Kyle was making his own new segment and didn't offer to make Steve's own new segment in addition. He was just kind of just letting Kyle do his own thing and then kind of just being a part of that without taking the initiative to make his own new segment like Kyle did. And I think that's kind of the problem.
Well, unfortunately, now I don't know how much of this has been made public, but I have privileged information on this. Steve McRae actually did make such an offer, and Kyle refused. Basically, Kyle wasn't interested in having a segment. Kyle wasn't interested in any episode where Steve McRae would actually be in charge. And we even saw examples of this in that leaked phone call where Kyle was complaining about how much work he was doing and how burdened he was. And we offered, hey, listen, take a vacation for an entire week. And that wouldn't have worked. I even said for like the flat earth stuff, you mentioned episodes where they would kind of act like safe spaces. And by the way, I totally agree with that. But there was a reason why the last episode that I was supposed to be on did not air. And the reason was because I wanted Steve to moderate. I wanted Steve to be there, not Godless Engineer, not Casey. I wanted Steve to be there. And because Steve was even a participant, that hangout wasn't going to happen. And this was before the leaked phone call happened because I was texting him before this. So if you were me, if you were in my position, you made that same request to Kyle, Kyle would have replied with the following. Kyle would have said, well, then in that case, don't show up. If I ever get Kyle's permission, I'll post these screenshots of my text messages with them. But that, along with the fact that Steve actually did make that suggestion and even offered to let Kyle take a break for a bit, and Kyle saying no to pretty much everything, it would have worked in the perfect world, but Kyle wasn't thinking perfectly for whatever reason. This is why I think Kyle royally screwed the pooch on this one.
Wait. So I'm aware that Steve offered to let Kyle take a break and a breather and take over for him, but I was not aware that Steve offered to start doing his own segment in addition to everything else. Like having Kyle take a break would take isn't something Kyle would want. Kyle likes doing the show, but I don't think. When did Steve offer to start doing his own segment independent of Kyle without Kyle having to do anything?
It was an idea that was floated around within the months that we were waiting for the actual explosion to happen. Because when Steve was trying to get in contact with Kyle, Steve was also working in the background for the months previous. This is why Steve was sending Kyle possible guests, which Kyle never got back to. And that was with underneath the understanding that, hey, if you don't want to be on, I will take over. In fact, I think it would be better if I took over. This is something that Steve would have to reveal later on. But in my conversation with Steve, he offered that. And not only that, he even offered doing such a thing with me. So I know that he wanted me to be on there for some of the guests that he wanted to appear on the NonSequitur show, but Kyle would just have none of it.
Right. So I would take issue with the word take over there. So, I mean,
for that one episode.
Right. So if you offered to, we're going to do our own segment, me and Reds, or Steve and Red would do their own segment and have this host on, I mean, I don't see Kyle saying no to that. I mean, if he did, and I'm wrong about that, then yeah, you got me on that one. But I'm pretty sure if he would just offer to say, Steve wants to do his own segment with Red as a co-host and have this person on without Kyle, he'd probably be okay with that. I don't see any issue there.
Well, I didn't see any issue with that as well. But again, Kyle wasn't thinking straight. But not only that, I would also bring this into question. Why would Kyle go forward with these this is going to be my show without Steve, for example. This is going to be my segment type of thing. This will be your segment type of thing. why did that idea get pushed through on Kyle's end without Steve actually giving the go-ahead? That was something that I also found very weird. Steve, on the other hand, would go to Kyle, and then Kyle would just never reply and say, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, or no, that's not a good idea. Hey, look at these hosts I got for you, Kyle. What do you think of them? And no reply. Basically, he's been working behind the scenes for months before this, and then said, you know what, fine, if you don't want to come on with these guests that I'm getting lined up, then let me find someone to replace you, at least for these segments, so that we could have a working show and I can still be a part of this. But Kyle, that wasn't the idea Kyle had in his mind. And again, I have privileged information, so I spoke to Kyle. But Kyle's plan was to basically feed Steve the scraps as Kyle saw fit. And that is not the non-sequitur that Steve signed up for. That is not the non-sequitur that Steve helped build. It's not one of these things where, oh, I'm going to wait until the non-sequitur show has an audience, is successful, can stand on its own 2 feet, and then at that point, I'll go ahead and settle for the scraps as you see fit. That doesn't make any sense to me that Steve would actually go for something like that, and it makes no sense to me that Steve would even accept something like that.
Right, I would agree, but I'm going to give Kyle the benefit of the doubt and just say that's because he's a terrible communicator. Like the fact that he doesn't get back to people, he doesn't get back to anybody. It takes months to get him to respond to anything for anybody. That's just Kyle. So I don't think this is some malicious plan of Kyle to try and feed Steve the scraps. I just think it's Kyle being Kyle and being a bad communicator.
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I think that if they had calmly really had the opportunity to talk this out, and the reason they didn't was in fact Kyle's fault, because he does never get back to people. But if they really had the time to talk this out calmly, I think they would have been able to work it out so that Steve could have his own segment and Kyle could have had his own segment. And I don't think there would have been any issues there. But again, that's Kyle's fault because Kyle never gets back to people, but that's just Kyle.
Well, it's not just not getting back to people. Keep in mind, before the screaming match even happened on the leaked phone call, what was the first thing that Kyle said? The first thing Kyle said was, nope, no, we're not having this. And then Steve calmly replied, yes, we need to have this conversation. I've been trying to get in contact with you and talk about this for a long time. But Kyle was having none of it. That to me speaks a lot. That speaks volumes. That Kyle pretty much already has it in his mind what he wants to have happened. He probably would have wanted it to go over a little bit smoother than what it actually did and not have the massive amount of backlash it actually did. But what we saw there from Kyle was pure avoidance. That's
well, yeah, but I think that has to do with more just the stress level he was going through. Because if you're stressed and really uncomfortable with things, talking things out is extremely difficult. I don't think that was him being maliciously trying to phase out Steve. I was thinking that was him just being super stressed and not being ready to have the conversation.
That's fine. I understand that Kyle may have been underneath a ton of pressure and he may not have been thinking as clearly as you and I are. But I've spoken to Kyle in multiple private messages, and whenever I would make a suggestion about the Non Sequitur show before all this shit show actually blew up, he would always reply with the following: I need to run that by Steve. I need to run that by Steve. And then similarly, whenever I would make a suggestion about the Non Sequitur show to Steve, he would say, I would have to run that by Kyle. At some point, Kyle had it in his mind that Steve was just as much a part of the show as Kyle was. And with the multiple messages that have been going through, not only that, the history that the Non Sequitur show has, if you look back at everything in totality, it is clear as crystal that Steve McRae was as big of a part of the show as Kyle Curtis. Why we saw that shift may have been due to him being under a ton of pressure, but that's fine. But he would have to have been suffering underneath this ton of pressure for months. For months, he was doing this, avoiding this conversation and slowly shifting the show in whatever direction he wanted it to be. And he decided to call that, oh, that was just a natural progression. It wasn't. That was a slow, gentle takeover where Kyle would make the rules, Kyle would set the schedule, and then Steve would end up not being scheduled.
Right. So I don't think that it was the months and months and months of stress. I think that it was the first few months were just Kyle being Kyle and not getting back to people. And then at the end, when you cornered him, he just happened to be in a really stressful situation. So I think that was just bad karma or something. But the first few months, I don't think he was in that stressful situation. He was just not getting back to people because he's Kyle.
Well,
So
there was definitely the not getting back to people, which was a problem, but we also saw at the exact same time a shift when it came to the scheduling of Steve McRae. Sometimes Steve McRae wouldn't know that a show actually appeared on NonSec until after it was already posted. So we already saw even at this stage Steve starting to be phased out, and that shows that that Kyle has this idea in his head, and he was trying to aim for that idea.
well, again, I don't think this is phasing Steve out. I think this is just Kyle doing new stuff with the show.
Yeah, but
And
if you're having a 50-50 partnership on something, regardless if the other person is in it or not, you should at the very least say, "Hey, just FYI, this is happening," and just basically just inform the other person, like, "Hey, that was really great about the non-sequitur show episode that you were not part of. What episode?" That
yeah,
as
you're
as a
absolutely
50,
right. You're
as a
absolutely
50-50
right.
partner, I would be pretty peeved about that.
Yeah, Kyle has the communication skills of Deepak Chopra. He doesn't communicate well. He doesn't really articulate the things he should, and that's totally on Kyle. But I don't. It's like Hellman's razor. I don't think you should attribute malice that which can be explained by stupidity. I don't think this was Kyle's phasing Steve out. This was just Kyle being inconsiderate of Steve and not thinking and not treating Steve the way he should. But it wasn't him deliberately phasing Steve out. I think that's the distinction that we need to make.
That is a distinction we need to make, and I have to say I completely disagree. And the only reason that I disagree is because of the privileged information that I have. I have spoken to Kyle multiple times as we were getting closer and closer to this shit show. And on the last one, before the recorded phone call actually occurred, I had said, I want Steve McRae to be on this. And he replied with, then in that case, don't even show up. In that case, don't even show up. I'll find someone else to debunk this flat earther for you. So he already had this idea. This was a direction. This was intentional. This wasn't simple stupidity on his part. It was stupid to go through with it, definitely, as the subscriber count will clearly show, and it's like the dislike ratio. But he did that on purpose. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent that message that he sent me.
Right. I'm not seeing the connection you're making there. So Kyle had this new segment, which was just the Kyle segment that was the non-Steve segment.
No.
And he didn't want Steve to be a part of it. And you asked because you wanted Steve to be a part of it.
Let me make sure I'm clear. This was not part of any segment that Kyle had made. Flatterday Night Fights was always Steve's forte. Even Kyle knew this. And in his next episode, that was after the leaked phone call happened, he said, look, I offered Steve McRae, I apologize for the voice. I offered Steve McRae to come on for the science-y aspects of the show and not necessarily the bits about the identity politics. So flat Earth, as much as people may not understand it, is science. That is astronomy, that is geometry. This is all the things that Steve is good at. If there was ever an episode that would have been better fit for Steve McRae, it would have been that one. Why then did Kyle say that, I'm not going to allow Steve McRae on there, and if you don't like it, then you don't have to come on tonight? It was clear that Kyle, regardless if the show spoke to Steve's forte or not, didn't want Steve to be a part of the non-sequitur show.
Well, right, that makes sense. You're right that is a science topic that Steve would be qualified to handle, and so it would make sense to have Steve on that show. But I think you'd have to ask for more information on Kyle's side to say why didn't he want Steve on that show? Was he just pissed at him? Was this a part of some grand scheme, conspiracy with Russia to phase Steve out?
It definitely was a conspiracy, just not with Russia.
It was Donald Trump joke. So I think it's more likely that Kyle was just pissed at Steve in that one instance than this is some kind of huge conspiracy to phase Steve out. Now, it's possible that you're right, but based on what I've seen, it seems more likely that Kyle is just terrible at communicating. He gets angry at Steve sometimes, and it just kind of happened in an order that made Steve genuinely concerned about his position in the show. And so, but I still think that we should make a distinction between deliberate conspiracy to phase Steve out and just Kyle being Kyle.
Well,
I lean more towards the Kyle being Kyle segment. I don't think this was a conspiracy. I think that's just Kyle.
Well, then Kyle needs to correct the error that he just made. You know, if this was just Kyle being Kyle and Kyle genuinely made a mistake, then he needs to reverse whatever decision he just made. And he needs to do it quick, because here's the thing, regardless what excuse Kyle has, that was still Steve McRae's show. Steve McRae put his blood, sweat, and tears into that show. Kyle may think he did 95% of whatever happened on that show. It may have felt that way to him. I can tell you right here, right now, that is bullshit. Kyle did not do 95% of the show. It wasn't just Kyle that made the show what it is. That was Steve's show. So Kyle can have whatever, and Bulls, exactly. So Kyle can have whatever excuse he wants. That is perfectly fine. The problem is that how do you respond after that, after you've cleared your head? And so far, the only thing he has done is double down on everything.
No, he did backtrack. He did say he was sorry for banning Boole, and that was a mistake and something he did in the heat of the moment, and that Boole could come back at any time. So he did backtrack on that part.
Yeah, backtrack on that part, but we got to keep in mind the other partial owner in which there was actually, somewhat of an agreement with, and that's Steve McRae. And even Kyle had it in his head, I should say, that Steve was as big a part of the show as Kyle was. Steve was the other half of that show. And so giving that goodwill gesture to Boole is all well and good, but that gesture should be given to Steve McRae as well, because Boole was a big part of the Non-Sequitur. And no offense to Boole, but not as big as Steve McRae was. Steve McRae was there from the very beginning and worked his ass off to make that show what it is today.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the reason that hasn't happened is because of all the personal attacks on both sides, which are just terrible, like the GE stuff and the KC stuff attacking Steve. That should not happen. That's all bullcrap. And the Steve saying that Kyle filtered him out is kind of a personal attack against Kyle too, attributing malice to him, which I think is a mistake on Steve's part. I don't think he should do that. He's done that for me. He's accused me of dishonesty too a few times when there wasn't any. So the personal attacks, I think, are the terrible thing, and they're really what's tearing them apart right now. And those are the biggest problem. And if we can stop the personal attacks on both sides, then I think they can actually make up in some way, though I think Steve's in a better position now to just go on his own anyway.
I don't know if stopping the personal attacks will solve anything at this point. I think the damage is too far gone, where the only way to save what little is left of the Non-Sequitur show, reputation-wise, would be to Kyle admit to everything. Honestly, if I was Kyle right now and I came to this realization, I would be groveling at this point. I would be groveling, and I would be making a plea to other people to understand where I'm coming from. I was underneath a lot of stress, whatever the case may be, and I would start groveling. Even then, I don't know if Steve would trust him again. What I think needs to happen now is that the only way that Kyle can get some respect back is to do what was originally agreed. And if it cannot continue with the Non-Sequitur show, with Steve getting 50% of that show, being that Kyle's not going to let him on ever the fuck again, then the only solution is to stop doing shows on Non-Sequitur. Keep the channel up so that the videos can still get views and monetary gains can be gained from it. But if Kyle wants to go his own way, the correct way to do that would have been to start a whole new channel and go from there.
That's a lot to ask, especially since starting your own new channel, since I've done it, is extremely unprofitable.
It may be, but at the same time, though, you can't just willy-nilly cut out a 50-50 partner. Like I said, just because I give you the keys to the Ferrari to have creative freedom with it, that doesn't automatically make it your Ferrari where you can do with it as you please. That doesn't mean that if I give you the keys, you have every right to go to a paint booth, paint Britney Spears bitch all over the goddamn thing, and then expect the other guy to be okay with that. We agreed that it was going to be red, dude.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And again, my position is that he wasn't cutting Steve out. He was just doing his own thing, and it was just taking up more of his time, and he had less of his time for Steve. But I think that the option was there if Steve had taken the initiative to start his own new thing in addition to Kyle's own new thing. I think that should have been, Steve should have pushed for that harder, and that would have solved the problem. on both sides.
The new thing would have been okay, but here's the thing: Steve never knew about that because the new thing just sort of happened without Steve being informed that a new thing was even occurring. That episodes were even airing. In fact, even Boolinator wouldn't be informed that a show was going on until quite literally 30 minutes prior. Oh, and I'm also doing 2 shows tonight. Well, thanks for informing me, dude. So
That's just Kyle being Kyle. Kyle's a terrible communicator.
and that's Kyle's fault. That we shouldn't be dogging on Steve McRae for being rightfully pissed off in all of this. And Kyle needs to correct the wrong that he has done. Unfortunately, I don't see Kyle doing that. What I see Kyle doing is doubling down, except for the bit you mentioned about Boolinator. That much I give him credit for. That's fine. But he was cutting Steve out of a 50-50 partnership without even communicating with Steve, even posing it as an idea. Hey, would you be okay if I scheduled on less than 1 time per week? Because at one point, that's what it turned into. Steve would hardly be on. I remember one time somebody in the live chat was like, holy crap, Steve McRae is here. This is my lucky day. Because it was so rare to see him at that time because Kyle kept just doing his own thing, not informing Steve. Meanwhile, Steve, being oblivious to what the hell's going on, is still gathering guests in the background. None of this is fair to Steve. And if this was just Kyle being Kyle, which let's go ahead and say for the sake of argument that it was, Kyle needs to apologize for that and work to fix it.
Right, I totally agree. I think that should be Kyle's next step, is to go down that route and say it was his mistake. He did do a bad job communicating, and it wasn't malice on his intent. I think that is what should happen too. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and also just to kind of drive this home, where Kyle needed to, even if Kyle wanted to do his own show with his own topics, with his own people, he should have still informed Steve about doing that, and he never did.
Yep, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So I would say that in order for Kyle to reverse whatever damage, he would have to admit to that and work to fix it. And you know what? I would even pressure Steve McRae to talk to him too, and Bool, of course, Bool.
Yeah. I think they should definitely talk it out and try and, once they cool off and all the personal attacks stop and it stops being as vitriolic as it is, they should definitely talk it out, because I think there is a lot of miscommunication and attributing a lot of malice where there isn't any. And I think they can work it out.
Yeah,
and have a good relationship again.
I hope they do. I really do hope they do. At the end of the day, though, I don't put any fault whatsoever on Steve McRae, instead of maybe being a little bit of a hostile prick at times. Which, you know what? At the beginning, that's what was asked. When it was originally asked, Kyle replied with, "I want you to be you." And in fact, let's take a look at the About section of the NonSequitur show. NonSequitur is a podcast crafted by uncommon philosophy, where bold ideas are righteous, unique perspectives are gospel, and where strong opinions are sacred. Now, I don't see any section there where it says, except if it's from Steve. Fuck Steve. But moving on from there, Kyle Curtis and Steve McRae's style of optimistic sarcasm balances entertainment with information designed to open minds and provoke thought. I just want to highlight the part where it says Kyle Curtis and Steve McRae's style. And that's in the About section of the entire NonSequitur show. So even in the description of what the NonSequitur show is, Kyle Curtis and Steve McRae are put forward as equals. They are co-hosts to one another. And if you look at the NonSequitur show hosts, where Steve McRae is still listed, which I find comical, when you click on Kyle Curtis, it says co-host. It doesn't say co-host and owner. So at the very beginning, there was this mindset that Steve would be 50-50. Anything that goes on the show, they would discuss with each other. And from my understanding, that's what happened when the show originally started. And then Kyle decided to, take the wheel on this one. Jesus, take the wheel. And it was steering it in wherever direction you wanted to go. And when Steve McRae wanted to stop at the Chuck E. Cheese, Kyle said, no, fuck you. I want to go to SeaWorld.
Right. So again, I think that's because some of the guests complained about Steve and they didn't want to be a part of shows with Steve. And so Kyle was creating a space for them to be able to participate in the show without Steve.
This is true. Steve has been, a bit of a prick to a few of the hosts that were
A
there.
bit.
Yeah,
A bit.
just a little bit. Hey, I'm in full agreement with you there. Steve
Uh,
can be a bit of an ass, but here's the thing. Kyle was worried about the court of public opinion, and that was the main push that was trying to make Steve be sidelined. That was the main push in Kyle's mind. I said, Kyle, listen, if those guests did not want to come on because of Steve, you don't need them. You had Lawrence freaking Krauss on. You don't need Aaron Raw. I'll tell you one thing. I've listened to Aaron Raw. I've listened to Aaron Raw, and I've listened to him again. We know what he's about. That's fine. But it's not every day that you speak to Lawrence freaking Krauss. And Steve had a ton of guests that, in my opinion, no offense to the few guests that didn't want to come on, that would have been a lot more, not really entertaining, but more thought-provoking than Aaron Raw and Matt Dillahunty. There still would have been a successful show even without them. But I think the main push that really got Steve pushed over to the side is because of him offending Kyle's friends, which I don't really agree with, but that's a story for a different time. But at
well,
the end of
Kyle
the
said
day,
that
it should have
that
been,
wasn't a part of it.
yeah, it should have been their loss in that case. Oh, you don't want to come on to Non-Sequitur show even though Steve is my co-host, or because Steve is my co-host, then it's your loss. We'll find someone else to fill that slot. As far as I was, informed, they had the slot filled for months ahead. So they could have easily found someone else to fill that slot. It's not like they were desperate for Aaron Raw or Matt Dillahunty. They had other people lined up ready to go. In fact, after the Non-Sequitur show hit that speed bump that we're currently debating, Steve got contacted by a few of those potential guests saying, hey, when is your own show starting? And when can we schedule something? So there was clearly a drive to show up on the show, but because two relatively popular guests didn't want to show up, all of a sudden we have to axe one of the 50%. That makes no sense to me. That to me is suicide of the show.
Well, again, my position is that he wasn't axing Steve. He was just creating a new segment, a safe space for those people who were anti-Steve.
I think he was axing Steve just because of the way things were going, and the private conversations I've had, and also the last bit where it's like, oh, well, if you're not going to come on the show unless Steve is present or you're not going to come on this episode, I should say, because Steve's not present, even though it totally fits the Steve's forte, then you can just not show up. That right there indicates to me that this was a complete axing of Steve.
I'd like to ask if you can get Kyle's permission to release those to give more credence to what you're saying, because I don't have access to that privileged information. And I'm interpreting it in the most charitable way possible for Kyle and thinking it's probably just Kyle being Kyle being a bad communicator, not a deliberate attempt to phase out Steve. Until I can see more evidence against that, then I can't. Then, from my interpretation, it's just Kyle being Kyle. I don't see any malice in what Kyle's doing. If you can present more information, then once I have that, I can change my position.
I wish I could, but unfortunately, and this is completely irrelevant. I'm not going to use this to back me up in any way, shape, or form. But after Kyle made a threat against me over text, I kind of blocked his number. So I'm not going to actually get in contact with him or ask him for anything, because at this point, no. If someone else wants to get his blessing and then relay that information back to me, I'll be more than happy to release them.
Fair enough.
I'll be more than happy to release them. But at the very end of the day, let me see if you agree with me on this. Would you agree that the show was, just as much Steve McRae as it was Kyle Curtis?
Right, absolutely. Kyle did all the technical stuff, or a lot of the technical stuff, and Steve did all of the interpersonal relationships and the communications with the fans and the guests and stuff.
And judging by what you've seen, if Kyle was really interested in the court of public opinion, in your opinion, has the court of public opinion spoken with sufficient volume to tell Kyle what they think?
Right. Well, I think this falls into that same atheist plus debate, Gamergate debate, where the two sides are kind of split down the far left and the not as left. So there's definitely support for Kyle, but it's mostly from the further left side of the atheist community.
It
But
very well.
most of the support goes to Steve for sure.
It,
Most of the fan base of the non-sequitur show are the more middle ground atheists.
the more okay then. And also, in your opinion, would you agree with me that when Kyle said that he did 95%, which then magically changed to 90% of the work, do you agree with me that that's a little over the top?
Right. That's just Kyle only being cognizant of his side of the work, him doing all the technical stuff. He wasn't really thinking about all of the interpersonal relationship and intermingling with the fan base and doing all of the networking stuff as work. He because that's not his kind of forte. He didn't see that as actual work, and that was his mistake. He's wrong about that. Steve
Or
did do a lot of work for the non sequitur show.
and the last question I have, and this one is a really big one. Do you agree that in a 50-50 partnership, one person cannot overrule the other and basically forcefully take whatever in the direction that they want, whether it's a channel or anything else? If you are,
Right. That absolutely. And
but
I'm kind of like I'm concerned. How did that happen in the first place? Because it seems like Steve allowed or somehow Kyle got control of all the managing all of the websites and the finances and stuff, and Kyle and Steve essentially had no access to it somehow. I mean, I don't know how that happened. If you have 50% control, you should both have access to that thing at all times, and it should be impossible for one person to take control over that entirely. So I
yeah,
don't know how that happened, but I definitely think that was a mistake on Steve's part to allow that to happen,
I
and he should
would
have had something from the beginning.
I would definitely agree. That was a mistake on Steve's part. We may never know why that happened or how that happened, but the question is, what can we reasonably conclude based on the information that we do have? And the information that we do have is that regardless if Kyle had the keys to the Lamborghini, it wasn't his right to drive it off the bridge. It wasn't his right to set it on fire. It wasn't his right to urinate on the leather seats, even though it's just been detailed and spit shined. So we don't. It's none of that. What we can see is that the Non Sequitur Show website, the Non Sequitur Show merch, even Kyle himself said that all things considered, this was a 50-50 split. And Kyle doing anything without Steve being at least aware of it was wrong. This is, in my opinion, this is entirely Kyle's fault. Could Steve be a little bit more diplomatic? That's fine. But I say at the very beginning, Steve could be the worst person in the world and kick puppies and eat children alive. It wouldn't matter. You made a deal with your partner. You need to honor that. And if things are just not going the way that you thought that they would be going with your 50% partner, you don't do a hostile takeover and kick out not only him, but your producer as well, which was a dick move, and do the things that you were doing and try to spin it off as, oh, this was just a natural progression.
Right. So again, I see that as just Kyle being a terrible communicator, which is all Kyle's fault. And then in a moment of rage, him doing the dumbest thing he could have done, which was to kick out Boole and Steve. And he should not have done that. That was a terrible mistake.
Yeah,
And
so
he should definitely apologize for that.
so basically what you're saying, just to make sure I understand you correctly, is there should be a hashtag called hashtag Steve Kicks Puppies.
Well, that should definitely exist, but for different reasons.
Okay, perfect. I'm glad that we agreed this. So hashtag Steve Kicks Puppies, and you agree with me that Kyle should now at this point be working overtime to get in contact with Steve and actually come to a reasonable compromise with Steve that both of them
Right.
agree on.
Absolutely. He should definitely try to explain the situation more. From my perspective, I think he should explain that he was a terrible communicator, didn't explain at all what was going on, which was completely unfair to Steve. And Steve had genuine reasons to be concerned about what was going on because it was a threat to his livelihood. And the cornering of Kyle, which was justified because they didn't have any other way to get a hold of him, even if it did upset Kyle, was justified and it needed to happen. And now Kyle really needs to apologize on a lot of things to be able to try and mend the damage that's been done to their relationship and the community.
Now, I have time for one more question for you. My question is, if Steve McRae and Kyle decide to keep the channel non-sequitur and they decide to putting out content, does Steve have the right to air episodes on that channel if he has, all everything set up, like the guests, the producer, the music, the artwork? Basically, it's still a non sequitur episode, but one where Steve got the guests, Steve does the interview, and Steve, reads off the super chats, does all the things that Kyle does, but it's just Steve in the captain's chair. With the Non Sequitur show, does Steve have that right to do episodes every now and then on the Non Sequitur show?
Absolutely. I think that the best outcome possible here would be that Kyle does his own thing on the Non Sequitur show, Steve does his own thing on the Non Sequitur show, and sometimes they come together and do cooperative things on the Non Sequitur show. They should both have the right to do all of those.
All right.
In equal
I don't want to be the only one here. So do you have any questions for me before I guess we hand it back off to Jim, the moderator?
No, I think you had great questions that led right into the correct topics that we had to discuss to get to the core of the topic, and I think we got that done pretty well.
Jim, we relinquish the rest of our time back to you, good sir.
Thank you very much.
And Steve kicks puppies.
Oh yeah,
Don't
and Steve
forget.
kicks puppies. Fuck you, Steve.
Thank you very
Jim,
much.
you're muted. Can't hear you.
Thank you very much. It will be a little bit loud, as right now I don't have my own office, so you do hear a vacuum right now. Very embarrassing. But I promised Red that we will only go for an hour. So I'm going to try to speed through as many super chats as possible. In the live chat, please let me know if you cannot hear. Oh, it just got quiet. Perfect. So I'm going to read through as many as possible. I'm honestly, I've never sweat so much. I am honestly just sweating bullets. It was like, oh my goodness. So thanks so much for being here, everybody. This has been a party. Thanks for TJump and Red for being here. We really appreciate it. And for such a actually really civil conversation. So, and one thing I was going to say too is the part of the philosophy of this channel is we hope that people realize you could disagree and be friends. That's the biggest thing that if I have any agenda, if I have any bias, that I'm just gonna put out there. That's it. That one I will just push and say, you guys, I hope that people can keep their friendships, even disagreeing on these personal types of things or religion, atheism, whatever it is. So thanks for your super chat. Adherent apologetics, he said, for charity. Thanks so much. And as mentioned, 100% will go to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. Ian, thanks for your super chat donation, who also said for charity. Venox said save all the boobies. Thank you very much, Venox. Appreciate that. King Stepu, thanks for your super chat. They said the SS non-sec has sunken. It's over. Kyle Steed has the agnostic high ground. I appreciate the Star Wars reference. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Brian G, thanks for your super chat as well. He said, James, could you please give us the ability to permaban the porn bot spammers? Pretty please. I've never, this is the first time they've ever been here, and it happens to be the first time that Red was ever here. I think I've kind of made the connection. Just kidding. So
that is, by the way, the correct connection to make. Good on you, sir.
So hopefully we got rid of those. Thanks for everybody's patience at the start. It was flying, not only with a bunch of creepy spam, but also I had not had slow mode on since it's been a long time. So next up, Reed Charbonneau, thanks for your super chat. He said, on a laptop, how do I unpatron from NonSec? I wish I knew. I have no idea how Patreon works. More power to those who use it. Maybe we will someday, but I wish I could help you. I could shoot me an email. By the way, speaking of emails, if anybody wants to, we want to have full transparency about the donation. If anybody wants to see the receipt, feel free. I don't care if you're hey, you've never heard of me, but please send me the receipt. I'll send it to you. That's totally cool. Shoot me an email. My email is in the description. We just want to have full accountability and transparency when we're going to claim that we're going to give it to a charity. So next up, Sentinel Apologetics, thanks so much for your super chat. He said, rolling on the floor laughing, TJump has lost the plot. Tom, if you want to respond to that, I think they're making fun of you. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can.
No, I'm good.
Gotcha. Okay. Next up, the Attila the One, thanks so much for your super chat. They said, Tom, it's like you didn't even study the situation. Oh, snap. Tom, does that one get you? You want to respond to that?
Nope, I'm good.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Artisan Tony said, don't let this channel become the Jerry Springer show. Create new content and move on. The content has been rehashed over and over. It's old already. Well, we will work on that for you. I appreciate that constructive criticism. And that's one thing we want people to know is if you have constructive criticism, let us know and we will work on it. We've kind of stuck with Phil religion topics in creation, which is that's outside of my niche, but because I've got my master's in philosophy, that's where I feel most comfortable is philosophy of religion. But we can bring in new topics. We can start doing more politics again. If that's what people would enjoy, please leave a comment letting us know what you'd like. You've seen Tom debate the wall as well as other stuff. Brian G, we already got that one. Artisan Tony said, this debate is antiquated already, not modern. Artisan Tony, quite the critic, but I thank you for your constructive criticism. We will work on it. I think he means that. Do you think he means, Tom and Red, do you think he means that we're like late because it's been a week since the...
Oh yeah, we're totally late.
We are late. Sorry about that, Artisan Tony. We're going to work for you. We're going to work to improve. Reed Charbonneau, again, thanks for your super chat. He says, jump Tom. Do you like that, Tom?
Yeah, I got that a lot in grade school. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's see. Austin Blanton says, I am not sure, Tian Eptine? I don't know what that word is. Tianeptine. Tianeptine? Thanks so much. I don't know what that means. Hopefully it's not dirty. Quisa, thanks for your super chat. They said, TJ, oh, look, they're coming after you, Tom. Sorry, you don't sound serious at all. The arguments literally sound like a lawyer doing pro bono work. Ah, jeez. Tom, if you want to respond, you can.
Hey, well, they're calling me a lawyer, so that's a compliment. I'll take it.
It is pretty nice. Roy, thanks for your super chat. He said, I was told there was going to be a donkey show. I'm not exactly sure what a donkey show is, but does it sound
Oh
good?
God, yeah. That's me. I can elaborate if you really want to, but it's kind of gross.
That's okay. We appreciate it, but we can hear about your personal life later. Ricky Bobby, thanks for your super chat. Ricky Bobby says, perpetuity. And that was it. Thanks for your super chat, Ricky Bobby. Quisa sent friend Roy, contact Red's Rhetoric personally for cool donkey reproductive activity. Be discreet. Just keeps coming back up, Red. So
It does.
Attila the One, thanks for your super chat. They said stating facts is not a personal attack. Tom, got a response, Tom?
I'm not sure what he's talking about, stating facts.
I'm not sure. But we appreciate the super chat, and everybody loves you, Tom. We do love you. Love, like teasing is my love language, and so I appreciate that. I send Tom all sorts of weird messages on Facebook. Cillian Holland, thanks for your super chat. They said, no malice? Then why is Kyle keeping the Teespring? I don't know who would answer that, but Reed Charbonneau, thanks for your super chat. He said Kyle screwed up the Alex Jones wife interview. Gotcha. Thanks for your super chat, which will go to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, as well as Brian G. Thanks for yours. He said, talk about Patreon and the financials. Is that something that you guys want to talk about?
Well, Kyle said he's going to give him the financials. He's going to give him the 50% of all the stuff. So until he breaks that promise, then he's technically keeping his word, though he's taking longer to do it than he probably should.
I have seen more of the financials than Steve McRae has, and that's just messed up. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Gotcha. Next up, give me 1 sec, the page is loading. The Boy Assassin. I think it's F-Boy Assassin. Thanks for your super chat. Who said, Tom Jump, and then in capital letters, DFOTY. I don't know what that means.
That means dumb fuck of the year.
Oh, snap. I'm sorry, Thomas. I don't know what these like hip slang terms are. I'm not with it anymore. Tom, if I would have known that. If you guys listen, I'm sure he means it in love, Tom. If you want to respond, Tom, you can, but
no, I'm good. That's fine.
I
don't mind at all. Don't bother me.
I love that you got thick skin, Tom. You are cut out for the internet. Trevor Taylor.
Your weird messages on Facebook are a little more creepy.
Yes, they are pretty weird. Trevor Taylor, thanks for your super chat. He says, "How does Kyle make it okay? How does Kyle being Kyle make it okay for him to boot Steve for being Steve?" Thanks for your super chat. And Michael W. Roble, thanks for your super chat. He said, "Steve has just said that he won't talk to Kyle and doesn't want anything to do with Non-Sequitur show. You're wasting your breath, Red."
Yep. Kyle and Steve now have to speak to each other through lawyers, so that's probably the reason why.
Gotcha. Next up, Attila the One, thanks for your super chat. He said, "How about don't jump Tom," in quotes. That's never the answer. Thanks for that, Attila. I think Tom agrees. Let's see. I think that's it. We want to close the Q&A just because we promised the speakers we would only take about an hour. Red's got plans after this, and I'm sure TJump has a hot date. So, one sec, really quick. I've just got promise I'm getting my own office soon. It's going to be really quiet. Just if we do have, let's see what we got for time. 64 minutes. Forgive me. I'm really sorry about that. I just want to respect the debaters' time, as it's been really kind of them. I feel like I owe them, and so I want to try to wrap up within an hour as promised. So thanks so much for your questions, everybody. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you being here, and we're excited about the future. We encourage you to check out not only the speakers' channels, TJump and Red, who are linked in the description, but also the great debate community and Steve McRae. As Steve was, like I said, a giver. He came to me and said, "Hey, like, let me promote you on." Gosh, why am I so dense today? The great debate community. Thanks so much, Tom, for your help. So with that, as mentioned, let us know if you have any more constructive criticism as we're working on building the channel. And I can't give everybody else enough credit. I'm so serious. I honestly feel overwhelmed with thankfulness for Steve's help, for the speakers' help, the debaters, and everybody else. We just are really thankful that you're here. All the good ideas are from everybody else. I'm just like pushing the send button on emails, and so I can't thank everybody enough. This is truly like a community-owned channel. It's like an abstract entity. So thanks for that. Last, the speakers, if you want to say anything before we wrap up, the floor is yours.
All right.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us on. I really appreciate the opportunity. Always a pleasure. And I really hope that Steve and Kyle make up and become a good mommy and daddy again.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Yep, same here. I hope they kiss, make up. You know, a lot of things can be saved from this, in my opinion. Whether it does or not is up to those two. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I really do appreciate it. And thanks for donating all the super chats to charity. I appreciate that as well.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for helping us, like, making it possible. So with that, glad to have everybody here. We hope to see you next time. Tomorrow, Prodigy Gregory will be debating on the contingency argument for God's existence. So new topic. And with that, I want to say thanks for coming by, everybody. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care.